Okay, that's it. So, hello everybody. It's Terry and obviously Dino to my left here again. Last week after we wrapped up some of Dino's wonderful Carlton experiences, I put forward a task to him to try and expand on being called a heretic, as we often do. Um, or more the word apostate, because Dina mentioned last week that if you question Jehovah's Witnesses on their beliefs, despite not actually giving any of your own beliefs, you get
Mhm.
called an apostate for just asking them to clarify their own beliefs. And when me and Dina bumped into Brother Bouncer a wee while ago, he looked at me straight away and says, I can't speak to you because you're an apostate, even though it's the same thing. I just ask people to explain their beliefs. So I just thought it'd be interesting because to my opinion, the people who are the apostates these days are actually the current Jehovah's Witnesses because they completely had completely different beliefs to the ones that me and Dina had in the
Mm.
80s. So
Yeah.
if one of the Jehovah's Witnesses from 2025 was transported back to the 80s and started coming up with all these things, we'd say, sorry, that's apostasy. And yet now we're the apostates. So I thought I'd open this up to Dino to tell us a little bit more, doing some research on heresy and apostasy, and is also going to bring in a little thoughts on the Apostle Paul. So Dino, take it away.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, so it's too much of an easy get out for the Carters to just call you an apostate because it saves them having to try and reason with you and come up with answers. So it's an easy get out. So I was going to just look briefly at the terms themselves, and I'd like to add one other term, which is Antichrist, which is used in the scriptures as well. I haven't so much got experiences to talk about tonight, but maybe just one or two kind of scriptural thoughts and then a few references to some books, which hopefully you'll find interesting. So first of all, if we were to turn to First John chapter 4, verses 2 and 3, it makes an interesting comment that this is how we may recognize the Spirit of God. Every spirit which acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, and every spirit which does not thus acknowledge Jesus is not from God. This is what is meant by Antichrist. Okay,
Okay.
and then
Right.
in Second John 1 and verse 7, it repeats a similar thought. It says, many deceivers have gone out into the world who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is the key phrase, as coming in the flesh. These are the persons described as the Antichrist, the arch deceiver. Okay,
Right.
so in the first century, um, Christians started to have various ideas and teachings. And in the first century, there was a heresy which was called Dossetism. And what that was that people started to think that Jesus wasn't actually a real flesh and blood human, right? There was all sorts of different ideas about whether he had been some sort of spirit being, the Logos, or an angel had been transferred into the body of a man, or whether they had just assumed flesh, a bit like the Genesis talks about the Nephilim, the evil
Okay.
spirits that
Right.
appeared as men. So they weren't true humans; they were a sort of hybrid human spirit being. So these comments in John were basically saying if you believe that Jesus wasn't truly human, some sort of hybrid spirit and flesh, that was Docetism, and that's what it was warning against, is saying that's the Antichrist. Okay, so the phrase "in the flesh" should really be understood as a real human being. So when you look at the Trinity doctrine, the Trinity says that Jesus was God in the flesh, right? And the creeds, the early Nicene creeds, for instance, they talk about him being fully God and fully man, right? And they talk about hypostatic union, which is not a biblical term at all, but it's the term that was coined to express these second, third century views about what Jesus was. So they basically are saying that he was 100% God and 100% man, right?
Right.
Which doesn't make any logical sense. You can't be
Yes.
100% something and 100% another. To
No,
borrow an expression,
unless Donald Trump is doing the songs.
well, maybe he could make an argument for that. But just think about a favourite film of mine, a favourite book as well, Clockwork Orange, right?
Oh,
Stanley Kubrick's Clockwork Orange. So Clockwork Orange, the idea was that it's something natural, but it's mechanical inside. So if you could literally have a clockwork orange, it couldn't be 100% clockwork and 100% orange. It'd have to be at least 50% each, maybe.
yeah.
But you couldn't be 100% something and something else. So the whole Trinitarian idea, I would actually say, is a Docetic view, because it's basically
Okay.
saying Jesus wasn't truly come in the flesh, right?
Right. Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Good point.
but here's the thing. Jehovah's Witnesses teach, as I've been harping on about, apparently, from one viewer, they teach that he was an archangel, right? But somebody had suggested it's not important, but it is for this point, you see, because if he was an archangel, then he wasn't truly a human being then, right? Because if he was an archangel whose life had been transformed, and in fact, really metamorphed into the womb of Mary, right?
Mm.
He's not a natural human, despite having one human parent. He's not, he's some sort of hybrid man, if he was an angel at the same time before coming to the earth. So I would actually argue that the Jehovah's Witness view is what's called an Aryan view, after Arius of Alexandria, who first kind of really pushed this idea about Jesus being um, born in heaven, being a created being. This is where it kind of comes from. So that Aryan view, to me, is actually docetic as well, because it's basically saying he's not a proper human. And a witness I'd spoken to recently, he'd actually said to me that the that Jesus had to be an angel to be able to give the ransom sacrifice. And Trinitarians actually say that Jesus had to be God to be able to give the ransom sacrifice. Both news are nonsense, I think. It's the scriptures do not say that. What the scriptures actually say is that Jesus had to be the equivalent of Adam, right?
Yes.
Adam was just a human son of God, right, who made the mistake. So the equivalent of Adam would be another, like, perfect human son of God, not an angel, not God himself. So the balance was the new Adam, the second Adam, which Paul kind of talks about. So there's nothing in Scripture that says he had to be God. Our next scripture, so I hope you don't mind me reading so much from various texts, but this is a really key thought on this. Romans chapter 1 and verses 3 and 4. Reading from the New English Bible, it says that it is about his son. On the human level, he was born of David's stock, but on the level of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, he was declared Son of God by a mighty act in that he rose from the dead. So Paul's saying here in Romans that Jesus was from David's stock, and that he was declared Son of God by the resurrection, right? Not by his birth. And you actually find when you read the scriptures, I think it's Matthew, talks about Jesus being Son of God at his birth. Luke talks about Jesus becoming Son of God at his baptism. And the book of Acts talks about Jesus becoming the Son of God at his resurrection. So the scriptures actually say three different parts of his life. So they disagree on some of that. But Paul's anyway saying that he was of David's stock. Now, again, looking at different translations, when I look at James Moffat's translation, which is a really good translation, he words it like this. He says, concerning his son, who was born of David's offspring by natural descent, right? Natural descent, and installed a son of God. So that's Moffat. And J.B. Phillips, again, I like going to J.B. Phillips. He's always got a really good turn of phrase. He says in Romans 1 and 3, God's son, a descendant of David by human genealogy, right? Human genealogy. So both those really good translations are pointing out the fact that the scriptures are saying that Jesus was a natural offspring of David, a proper human.
Okay.
And in fact, the Greek term in that passage, ek spermatos, David, actually spermatos, sperm. So it's highlighting the fact it's a natural descent. So the scriptures aren't talking about some sort of hybrid hypostatic union in Jesus. They're talking about a natural man, right? So any view that doesn't teach that Jesus was a natural human being, to my mind, are teaching a Docetic heresy. Okay, so the Jehovah's Witnesses are teaching, to my mind, a heresy if they believe that Jesus had a pre-human angelic existence before being born on earth. That may be a wee bit controversial, but I'd say check it up, read it, do the research.
No, it's interesting. It's interesting.
Because there is no Bible text that actually describes Jesus as an archangel. And in fact, in the biblical, the nativity accounts, Luke 1 and Matthew 1, they don't ever actually say that to Mary that what is being born in you is an archangel and who's going to be transferred into your womb. It doesn't use the Greek word metamorphosis, right? And there is a Greek word metamorphosis. Paul uses it in 1 Corinthians 15 when he talks about the resurrection and being changed in the twinkle of an eye. He's actually saying you're going to metamorph into the butterfly, the larvae, in the cocoon, and it completely transforms into something else, right? But the scriptures don't say that about Jesus. They don't say he metamorphed from heaven into Mary's womb. That there's just no suggestion of that at all. And in fact, if you bear with it, there's a really good comment from, I'll just show you. I like showing my books off. Showing that I haven't worked this out myself. It's purely reading. This is a really good book, Professor Jeffrey Lamp, God is Spirit. Okay, excellent read. And on this point about whether Jesus was a real man or not, he says that the concept of the pre-existent Son reduces the real socially and culturally conditioned personality of Jesus to the metaphysical abstraction human nature. So according to this Christology, the eternal Son, so if you believe that he was God the Son, the eternal Son, that assumes a timeless human nature. This is the point, which owes nothing essential to geographical circumstances. It corresponds to nothing in the actual concrete world. Jesus Christ has not, after all, come in the flesh, right? So he's saying if you believe that he pre-existed, whether it was as an archangel or whether it was as God the Son, if you believe that, you're basically believing that he has not actually come in the flesh, because you're believing he's some sort of hybrid creature and not a son of David, right? So I think it's an interesting point that most people miss. They think Dossetism is of years ago. I think Dossetism is rampant in Orthodox beliefs today. So that's Antichrist. Apostasy. Vine's Dictionary of Bible Words says apostasia. It means a defection, a falling away, or a rebellion. The New World translates apostasia as stand away from, a desertion, or an abandonment, right? So apostasy is generally used of someone who abandons their faith, right? So you could call someone an apostate if they've just walked away from Christianity altogether and become an atheist. So you could say they've abandoned their beliefs. But if you basically leave one denomination but continue to believe something else or join another church, strictly speaking, you're not an apostate because you still have a belief. You're just not believing certain tenets of a different denomination. So you can't just blanket call somebody an apostate if they're still having faith in Christianity. Okay?
Yeah.
So when you speak to the Carters, if you haven't even explained to them what you now believe, they're making a huge leap and a huge assumption if they just call you an apostate without any good reason, just because you don't believe certain tenets that they believe. But again, applying this to the Jehovah's Witnesses, they're too quick to throw that word about. Because as we said to Brother Bouncer, and he didn't really want to go there, he said to him about how Jehovah's Witnesses joined the United Nations as an NGO, a non-governmental organization, back in 1991. And I think they signed up for that, and they were in it for 9 years until somebody blew the whistle and reported it to the Guardian newspaper. The Guardian newspaper challenged the witnesses on it, and they tried to say, "Oh no, we haven't done that. We're just applying for a library card." They said they wanted access to the United Nations New York Library. That was just rubbish. They didn't need to become an NGO to get access to a United Nations library. So basically, they did it for their own political reasons, for getting access to various countries and some sort of prestige to be an NGO. But basically, what they'd done was they had abandoned their morals, their principles. They had abandoned their own teachings that the United Nations was the scarlet-coloured wild beast, and they climbed up on its back like the great harlot. So, if anything, the Jehovah's Witnesses became apostate when they joined the United Nations as an NGO. And that was 91. So when we left in the late 90s, we weren't leaving God's organization. We were leaving an apostate sect. We were leaving an apostate body. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they just don't want to go near that. They say, "Oh no, that wasn't true." The United Nations got so many, the NGO department got so many inquiries from witnesses and ex-witnesses about this as to whether it is true or not, that they actually had to put up a specific letter. They drafted a letter, and it's on their website, so that they don't need to keep answering the phone all the time on this subject. And it actually states, yes, the Jehovah's Witnesses joined us in 91, and they were there for 9 years before they withdrew after they get found out. It's fact. They tried to get out of it. So they're an apostate organization as far as I'm concerned. Heresy, Greek word hieresis, means a choice or sect, choosing a belief that contradicts established doctrine. So as soon as you swap doctrines and choose some other orthodoxy, you could be termed a heretic. For example, the World Council of Churches would call Jehovah's Witnesses heretics because they don't accept the Trinity. On that point, we can agree with them.
Yeah.
Because I don't believe in the Trinity, don't believe the Bible teaches that. But however, if you're a non-Trinitarian, then essentially you are a heretic from Orthodox Christianity, the World Council of Churches. But looking at Jehovah's Witnesses again, let's not forget where they came from. The Jehovah's Witnesses came from basically the Millerite movement, William Miller, and the Adventist movement. And William Miller was the one that first tried to calculate from the book of Daniel when the end of the Gentile times, the parousia. And William Miller actually calculated 1844 as the parousia. And that was known as the Great Disappointment, because 1844 came and nothing happened. So all the kind of Millerite movement started to collapse and fragment, one of which fragments was the Adventism and Seventh-day Adventism, such like. So the Jehovah's Witness prophetic chronology comes from Milleritism. They are a breakaway from that. The International Bible Students Association that Russell founded was a breakaway from Adventism. And Charles Taze Russell, who got involved with Nelson Barber, who also came from the same area, same field, the book of theirs that is mentioned in the Revelation Climax book is called Three Worlds. So that book, it mentions it, but it doesn't quote from it. But that book also uses that Millerite chronology, but adapts it. And through that, they get to 1874, when they thought the parousia began. And also explains how they get to 1914 from that point. Nelson Barber basically wrote all of that. It was published under the IBSA, and Russell paid the money, funded it, but it was all Barber's writing. But Russell basically ended his association with Barber because they eventually disagreed about the teaching of the ransom sacrifice. There's a big debate even now about the ransom, whether the Bible really teaches what's called penal substitution, that Jesus died as a substitute. You know, it's a big thing. That's how they fell out. But again, Russell broke away from that movement to form IBSA, International Bible Students. So he became a sect, removed themselves from one set of teachings and formed another. So they shouldn't really be banding about, oh, you're a sect or you're a heretic. Their whole movement is based on a heresy, on becoming a sect. And so basically then summary, apostasy is a deliberate abandonment, falling away or rebellion from your Christian belief. Heresy is a deviation from orthodoxy while still claiming to have a faith. So when you look at all those examples, you could easily argue that Jehovah's Witnesses can be accused of being heresy, apostasy, and even an antichrist. You know, so they should be careful about what they bandy about.
Very good.
How are we doing for time?
I think you've maybe got 10 minutes. Hold on, let's just see. Yeah, I think you've got 10 minutes. So if you want to bring up your poll thing, you've got 10 minutes to do it, right? You know.
Right, I'll try and get through this as quick as I can. Right, so here's the thing. See, if I was to, I'm arguing against the Jehovah's Witnesses just now, and the local witnesses know that. If I was to suddenly turn up at the Kingdom Hall one Sunday afternoon and say, I'm back, but you know what? Jesus spoke to me in a vision, and he's told me a new gospel, right? So what you've told me, forget about that. Jesus has spoken to me in a vision personally, and I've got his new instructions. What would they say to me?
They would say to you clearly that you were mentally ill, but more importantly, they'd just say that you were a heretic, an apostate, and an antichrist probably, and then they'd say, you do not say that again, otherwise you're going to get disfellowship. Just as simple as that.
They'd look at you like a madman. Jesus spoke to you in a vision. Jesus works through the governing body. They're the channel. So anything coming to God's people is going to come through the governing bodies, is what they say. He's not going to speak to you personally in a vision. But when we look at the scriptures, what we find is that Jesus appeared to the Apostle Paul in a vision, right? So he claims. So Jesus spoke to him in Galatians chapter 1, verses, I'll not read it because we don't have enough time, but if you read Galatians chapter 1, 11, 12, and 17, he basically is saying that he didn't get, in fact, maybe just read part of it. Yeah, it says, I must make it clear to you, my friends, that the gospel you heard from me preach is no human invention. I did not take it over from any man. No man taught me. I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. That's Galatians chapter 1. So he's saying he didn't get it from the governing body
Yeah.
in Jerusalem or the apostles.
Mm.
He got his information direct from Jesus. So
Mm.
I would say to the witnesses today, you say that only the governing body that Jesus is using.
Yes.
Here in
Yes.
the first century, he didn't go through the governing body. He went straight to Paul. He sidestepped the governing body, apparently. Right?
Yes.
So how can you accept Paul and his teachings and his writings if Jesus was speaking to him without going through the governing body? Has Jesus changed the way he works?
Mm.
Because if you look at it historically, Christian historians today have made it quite clear that they know this now. In Jerusalem was James the Just, who was one of Jesus' brother. He was in charge of the governing body in Jerusalem with the 12 apostles and older men. Right? They were the governing body that made the decision in Acts 15 about the Gentiles, whether they should get circumcised or not.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But Christian historians realize now that what Paul was doing was he was preaching to the Hellenic areas, the Greek areas
Yes.
of Jewish, Hellenic Jews, preaching to them, to the Gentiles. And they know now that basically a lot of the orthodox teachings of Christianity we know today, they're actually derive more from Paul's writings. And we know about this clash between Paul and Peter. And basically, well, we don't have time to read it all, but if you read through Galatians chapter 2 and verse 11, it's where he says he resisted Peter to his face. So what? The Apostle Paul resisted one of the governing body, told him he was wrong. Right? Could you do that today? With the JW governing body. Galatians chapter 3 and verses 24, 25. Might read that quick because this is important. Paul says, before this faith came, we were close prisoners in the custody of law, right? In the custody of law, pending the revelation of faith. Thus, the law was a kind of tutor in charge of us until Christ should come, when we should be justified through faith. Now that faith has come, the tutor's charge is at an end. So what he's saying is that the law, the Jewish law, the Torah, was just a tutor to bring the Jews along to identify Christ. But when Christ appeared, we didn't need the law anymore.
Yes.
We didn't need that. So what Paul was doing, I'm going to have to just shortcut this, but what Paul was doing was he was teaching that the Gentiles, when they're becoming Christians, he was saying you don't need to get circumcised and you don't need to obey the law, right? So the account in Acts chapter 15 where he says, abstain then just from blood and from things strangled and fornication, these necessary things. That's what the governing body in Jerusalem decided. Okay, the Gentiles don't need to get circumcised, etc., and they don't need to, as long as they follow the dietary kosher habits, things like that, that's fine. They were okay with that, so they let that go. But what Paul went on to do, and I've got this is another really interesting book, Professor James Tabor, Paul and Jesus. Now, in this book, he makes a point that Paul went beyond that. Just quickly read a wee bit from it here. He says that Paul believed that with the coming of Christ, the Torah of Moses, which he called the Old Covenant, had been superseded. It was fading away. That meant that even Jews were no longer under the Torah or obligated to observe the laws or traditions of the ancestral faith. So what he's saying is that Paul went beyond just telling the Gentiles don't need to get circumcised. Paul started preaching in all the Greek Hellenic congregations that he started. He was actually saying to the Jews in those congregations, even you don't need to follow the law. You can stop following the Sabbath law and getting circumcised and going through all the rituals. He was actually telling them, you don't need to live like a Jew anymore, right? But the point is that Tabor says in this book, and I've also got another book here, which is the Pentecost Revolution. The Pentecost Revolution by Hugh J. Schoenfield, who's one of my favorite writers. He's a Jewish historian, biblical historian. And he also makes the point that that Paul went beyond what the governing body at the time had said he could do. Just get the bit here. Where is it now? Wait a second. 183, yeah. It was bad plan. I've missed it. I've saved time. I'm not going to waste time trying to find it. But basically, he makes the point that, again, that Paul, when he was doing all this preaching, he was trying to convince Jews not to hold to the law covenant. It wasn't necessary. And Tabor says that originally the apostles didn't realize that is what he was doing. Page 216 of Tabor's book, he says, Paul calls himself an apostle. There is no indication that the Jerusalem leadership had ever given him that status. By authorizing his preaching to the Gentiles, they were not thereby conferring on him any special apostolic authority, right? So they never called him an apostle. He wasn't given that authority. And he started going beyond the provisions that they allowed him to do. And he started teaching really what was heretical. He was telling the Jews, stop being a Jew. Okay. And also there's another book here, again, Hugh J. Schoenfield, Those Incredible Christians. And page 152 of this is an interesting quote. It ties in what we spoke about earlier. It says, according to Irenaeus, who was a 2nd century patristic father, those of this persuasion believe that Jesus was born in the normal manner as the son of Joseph and Mary and declared to be Christ at his baptism. He's talking about the Essenes, who were a very early Jewish Christian sect. And it says that the reference to the use of prophetical writings indicates that the Jewish Christians employed similar methods to those of the Essenes in interpreting the Old Testament. And it says that the Nazarenes, who were, again, another early group, and various historians believe John the Baptist and even Jesus himself were part of the Nazarene movement in Jerusalem. He says the Nazarenes acknowledged only one gospel, that of Matthew, and that they would have nothing to do with the Pauline epistles because they denounced Paul as an apostate from the law.
Wow.
Right? Jewish historians.
That's interesting.
So they recognize. Now, if I've just got enough time, I will look at Acts 21.
You've got 5 minutes.
5 minutes, right? I can just get this done. If we were to look at Acts chapter 21 and verses 21 to 24, this is the account when Paul does get summoned up to Jerusalem. And James, the brother of Jesus, who was the head, and the apostles, they have him up and they basically say to him in Acts chapter 21, look, we've heard a rumour that you've been teaching the Jews not to follow the law. He said, so they say to him, there's a mob here, they're going to lynch you. Right? So they say to him, so that they see that that's not the case, we want you to you go up, I think the count says, we have 4 men here who are under a vow. Take them with you and go through the ritual of purification with them, paying their expenses, after which they shave their heads. So basically, they tell him to go up to the temple with these 4 men, go through a purification rite as required by the law, and then everyone will see that you're going through this purification, and that will say to them, oh no, we can't be teaching about not upholding the law. So Paul does that, he goes through that, okay? But then, just I'll make this the last scripture, 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Well, I've read this many times, but we can read it now in a new light. 1 Corinthians 9, verses 20 and 21. Paul says, to the Jews, I became like a Jew to win Jews, as they are subject to the law of Moses. I put myself under that law to win them, although I am not myself subject to it. To win Gentiles who are outside the law, I made myself like one of them. Right? So this is a famous passage where he's saying, be all things to all men.
Yes,
He's
yeah,
basically admitting there that to the Jews, he acted like a Jew as if he was under law so that
yes,
he wouldn't get lynched. And so even though he didn't believe in the law anymore, he went through it hypocritically, right?
yeah,
But then he goes back to the congregations in the Greek Hellenic world and starts saying, I would just appeared as a Jew to them so that they wouldn't, they would accept me. And when he goes to the Acropolis, he starts talking to the Greeks about all their gods. He's
yeah,
a
yeah,
chameleon that would just do what was required.
yeah,
So, but basically, when we look at these accounts, Corinthians, Acts 21, and what he states in the book of Galatians, the first few chapters, he's basically saying, I don't follow the governing body. They have no authority over me. He
yes,
talks about the superfine apostles. He's actually talking about James and Peter and John. He's saying that they have nothing over me. I get my beliefs, my gospel direct from Jesus. So he
yeah,
didn't believe in the authority of a governing body. He was doing his own thing. So
wow,
Paul, in summary, Paul was not appointed by the governing body, but he claims he was appointed by Christ directly, and that Christ didn't go through the governing body. He taught heresy against what the Palestinian governing body were teaching. He was saying that the law did not now apply to Jews as well as Gentiles. And Paul viewed the governing body as superfine apostles and not really, he believed they were below him, right?
wow,
So, an accurate, detailed study of the scriptures actually tells us, as Schoenfield was saying there, that ones and all through history and modern um, Christian studies, historical studies, are coming to this agreed point now that the Apostle Paul was a maverick on his own,
yes.
but
It
yet
was he was a rogue apostle.
a rogue apostle, and he was actually a heretic. He was teaching something
Wow,
against the governing body, but the Jehovah's Witnesses and Orthodox Christianity accept all of Paul's writings as inspired. So
wow,
we've got that division, that dichotomy of these two bodies, these two gospels.
yes.
But orthodoxy says, no, actually, they're all saying the same thing. They weren't,
No
you know.
one's right. We've got to wrap it up. We've got you've got 60 seconds to say goodbye, but I think you finally honed in at the end there the point you were trying to make, and it is an incredible and it's one I've never thought about. And
It's
hopefully it's food for thought for anybody else watching this. I think what you've come out with it is really powerful, really powerful.
yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Right. Anyway, it's time to say goodbye. But as Dino said last week, if you do like the videos, that mostly Dino does, if you do like them or subscribe, it does push the videos up so they get recommended to anybody who likes listening to this sort of debate. Or, well, we don't really debate. Dino talks and I listen and nod my head. So, anyway, it's time to say goodbye. So, okay, say goodbye,
Thanks,
Dino. All
Lindsay.
right.
It's good night from me, and it's good night from him.
Okay. Bye bye.
Good night.